Hey there, I am Barb Higgins, and this is 1,000 Tiny Steps. In this podcast, I share my stories of love, loss, triumph, and tragedy as I continue to retrace my steps and ponder what led to the death of my daughter Molly. By doing so, I hope to not only help myself, but to bring purpose and possibility to those who listen. If you are ready to laugh, cry, shake your head in disbelief, then tie, buckle, face up, or slip on your shoes, and join me as we begin our 1,000 Tiny Steps. When I started this podcast in September of 2021, I thought of it as a way to tell my life story. And I did. The first 12 months or so of that podcast, maybe even 18 months, it was just chunks of my life where I went through the good, the bad, and the ugly around what it was like to be Barb Higgins. And it was cathartic and it was helpful. And then I finished that and I started to have some guests. My podcast became much more whimsical. I would talk about things that came up for me. I would mirror some of my episodes on what was happening in the world today. While it was good and remained fun, I know that my listenership sort of stagnated, which I'm not out to get 1 million listeners, although I wouldn't mind. But my main goal is to help somebody with each episode. And I think for the most part, I've done that. A year of not really having a themed topic matter for that episode, that year, that chunk of episodes. I titled it The Year of Living Dangerously and moved into season 9, all about the 12 steps of AA in the book Breathing Underwater. That became a very cathartic season for me because it was like therapy. It was like going to AA again. Not that it necessarily lessened my drinking, but it certainly got me thinking and ruminating and reminiscing and thinking about all that is me. I've just finished now a season of lies and myth information. I could do this forever. We have so much manipulation of information in the modern age. I think we always have. When I looked at educational lies and realized how textbooks are so manipulated, content-wise, language-wise, what aspects of history are shared in a big way and others not so much. As a child growing up in the Northeast, there were huge pieces of World War II I knew nothing about until I went to college and learned about them from other people. World War II for me was all about what happened in Europe. And, you think of Pearl Harbor and all that went on in the South Pacific and Asia, I was clueless to that. As fun as that season has been, and I've really liked it and could keep going, after a while, I start to get really disheartened by what's going on. Season 11, which will start now, this is like my in-between episode, we'll have guests. Each episode will have a guest. And maybe here and there in between those episodes, it will just be me, maybe going through what my guests have shared. But what I've done is I have found an incredible group of women and girls who are connected to my life somehow. I either grew up with them, or I coached them, or I know them through CrossFit, or I knew them from running, or they were friends of Gracie's and Molly's. They're all connected to me in some way. So there's no one that will be a guest that I don't know on a personal level. But the main reason they've been selected is each of them will represent something that's relevant to me, something that I've gone through. So I got to looking at my website, 1000tinysteps.com, and I started going through the seasons. And the first season, of course, was Jack. I had just given birth to Jack. And so all of my connections around older mothers, infertility, child loss, scrutiny, public scrutiny around motherhood and being a woman or a female-bodied human, all of those things came to light in that season. And of course, that led into Molly. Child loss, dead kid, dead Molly money, what it's like to lose a child, what it's like to have a child that misses her sister, and so I still have to be a mother, and all of those things. That was probably a season of episodes that was most helpful, I think, because I know as the mother of a dead kid, there are not very many people that understand me and are willing to just let me be me. And I'll get into that a little bit as we go along. And I've gotten a lot of feedback from those episodes. Season 3 was trauma. So I've had a lot of trauma in my life. I had childhood sexual abuse trauma. I had finding out my father wasn't who I thought he was trauma. I've had alcohol and drug addiction trauma. I've had sexual assault trauma. I've had job loss and unbelievable abuse trauma in relationships. I've had child loss, right? I've had a lot of trauma in my life. I've had chronic illness and brain tumors, all manner of trauma. And I think on a personal level, that season was most helpful for me because I learned so much about trauma and how it evidences itself. Season 4 was about being a mom And so for a long time, I wasn't going to be a mom. That was how I was going to stop abuse in my family. I just was going to discontinue bringing children into it. And then I met Kenny and all that changed. So I've been a mom to baby Gordy, who I never got to meet as an alive human. Gracie and Molly, who I spent, well, Gracie's still here. I spent 13 years with the both of them. And then Jack, who I created probably the most purposefully of all the babies and blown away by on the daily. All very different motherhood experiences. I feel that I've connected with a ton of moms through these stories and all that I've gone through in that title of mom. Life before kids. One of my overriding thoughts now is that had I not had Jack, Gracie's in Florida, I would have unbelievable freedom, all manner of hours of the day. My life would be truly my own. And the selfish part of me sometimes gets overwhelmed that maybe I didn't think this through, right? Except then I lay my eyes on Jack, and he's such a miracle and such a gift and so hilarious. And what he gives to my life and what he brings to my life and what his presence has given me, that I realize sometimes that what we think we want or what we feel we should be doing is sometimes as far off as can be. That brings me back to when we pray for things and we say our prayers are never answered. Maybe we're just praying for the wrong answer. And so we feel that we're not being listened to. Okay, so that was season 5. Season 6 was life in high school. So I've had some pretty amazing connections since telling my stories about what it was like for me in high school, with my relationship with Science Guy and with all that came out of that, with my finding running and being really good at a sport for the first time in my life. I had so many massively big experiences as a high school student. That was a fun season for me because it was a reconnection series. So many people from my high school years reached out during that time. The perfect storm, I had to look at it. That's how much I blocked it out. The perfect storm was all of those things that culminated in 2015 to create the perfect setting for 2016 and Molly's death. I have so many troubling memories, and I'm still processing that season a lot. So The Perfect Storm was the name of a movie about a ship that sunk and how the storm itself was the convergence of like a full moon and a high tide and a storm all happening at the same time, creating massively huge waves and a rough sea. It's kind of like the blizzard of 78 was that way. And so I look at 2015 into 2016 as the perfect storm in my life. All of these podcast seasons, so to speak, were incredibly cathartic for me. And then when I was done with season, the perfect storm, I came into the year of living dangerously, right? That was 12 months worth of podcasts that didn't really follow a theme. So here I am now. I've done my life. I've gone in depth in a lot of areas, but I've left out a lot of incredible details. Some because I wasn't ready to share, others because I was protecting other people, others because the words didn't come out. I don't do a lot of preparation before my podcast episodes. I make a list sometimes, or I have an idea in my head, and I hit record and I just begin talking. And I always have to re-listen to make sure I don't sound like a jumbly sort of idiot. So today, what am I talking about today? Well, I'm going to go over some of the guests that I'll be having on the podcast in coming weeks and what subject matter they represent in my life. And to let you know that in many of these conversations, I will come clean with a lot more in-depth details of things that happened to me in the stories I've already told. I've written a book, Motherland, with the help of Virginia McGregor, and we had to take out the whole middle section of that book because it was all about the lawsuit that my family filed against the hospital and the pediatric office. I'm ready to really talk about that. And I know right now if any attorney affiliated or associated with that lawsuit is listening to this, I'll get a phone call from my attorney telling me to be careful. It's hard to be careful. I just did a blog post on dead Molly money. I have a really hard time being told to be quiet or accepting hush money. I have a very hard time with myself when I don't speak up on something because I'm afraid of the backlash. And we live in a culture right now where if you disagree with people on certain topics, you're name called and branded as phobic and bigoted and bad. And that's a very hard way for people to feel. I find myself feeling vulnerable and tender a lot of the time. How am I going to fix this? How am I going to keep my voice going? How am I going to share my voice? How am I going to let you know other voices that affect me? I'm going to have guests on my podcast. So 3 of the guests that you'll meet early on are girls that I came to know when I worked at Concord High School or coached at Concord High School. So Emily, Allie, and Amy are all girls that ran track or cross country for me,
or had me for health class, or had a sibling that ran track for me. All of them went to Concord High School. All of them have unique and interesting stories to share. All of them have been at the depths of despair and risen up to really do amazing things. Emily was a highliner, which is like a tightrope. It's called a slack line because it has give to it and it's flat. And highliners go across big canyons. They go from cliff to cliff on this slack line. She's a long Lyme sufferer, so she's had myriad physical symptoms that have been decimating to her. Married, divorced, driven across the country a couple of times, living a bit of a nomadic lifestyle right now, really finding herself. She takes a non-traditional path, and that can be lonely sometimes. And so we talk a lot about that. I came to know her just as a track athlete. She was always an enigma to me, and she was one of those girls, all of these girls, I knew at the time that I would remain connected with them. And she was one of them. I have strong memories of her from high school. She ended up being a massive piece of girls cross country. She had a big friend group that ran. It was wonderful. She was a wonderful addition to teams and such. And we've maintained contact on and off throughout the years. Amy was my very first babysitter that wasn't my mother or my sister. Gracie and Molly loved her. She was a student of mine. Again, I met her at Concord High School. Amy's story is mind-boggling. She has a relatively normal upbringing. A mom, a dad, a brother, lived in, Nashua, then moved to a small New Hampshire town. Life is going along just fine, sort of having the normal ups and downs of life. And she goes off to summer camp one summer and she comes home and she has a whole new family because her friend and her friend's two siblings are now part of their family. Now, I'll save the details of that violent story for the episode, but essentially, here are these three little girls, and they end up becoming a part of Amy's family. As big as that is, it's just a piece of Amy's amazing story and what she does now. Amy is the woman who I flew to Wisconsin and performed a secret marriage, a secret wedding ceremony, like 3 weeks after I had my head cut open and had the big brain tumor taken out. It was a pretty amazing trip. I'll talk to Amy. She's unbelievably successful in her life now. She has two daughters. Her oldest daughter is named Molly Grace, after Gracie and Molly. She's a huge connection in my life, a huge piece of why I'm okay sometimes. Allie is a young girl. Well, she's in her 30s now, like everyone else. She was a bit more peripheral in my life than Emily and Amy. She never ran for me. I had her in health class. I really knew her because I knew her mother and I knew her older sister. I have connections there. But I always knew who Allie was. I always reached out to Allie. I was an ear for her. She came to my classroom sometimes to talk about things. I will let Allie tell her story because it involves a lot of other people and it's not my story to tell. But she went through utter desperation and terror and darkness and is living a really fabulous life, single-handedly raising her daughter, going through all of it in a very transparent and beautiful way. She'll talk about relationships and abuse. She'll talk about death. She'll talk about drug addiction. She'll talk about being a mom. All of these girls have gone through things that I've gone through: chronic illness, drug abuse, addiction, depression, abuse, all of it. We all share all of these sort of tragic things that have happened to us in our lives. And I think we also all share our ability to come through it and to rise like a bit of a phoenix from the ashes and do good things and do great things. I also will talk with a woman named Lori who owns a CrossFit gym, and I've gone to several competitions at her gym, and she's another one. You meet her and there's something about her. We clicked right away. I'm sure she clicks with a lot of people, but I'm an older female CrossFit athlete. She puts on these amazing competitions for men and for women, but her gym is incredibly successful. Her children's classes and her fitness and CrossFit classes for people that don't think they're athletic are huge, unbelievably well attended and successful. Her outlook on life and what it means to own a CrossFit gym is fantastic. And if you looked at her walking down the street, you would not say, "Oh, I bet that lady owns a CrossFit gym." And there it is. That's the beauty of it. Sometimes the body in which we live, our little soul house, isn't always indicative of who we are on the inside. I will talk to Michelle. I always thought Michelle had a degree in counseling. She has a degree in exercise science, but she has a practice and she calls it like supportive treatment. She helps people connect their minds and their bodies. So neuroplasticity, neurofeedback, biofeedback, learning how to listen to your body and step out of yourself and pay attention to how you react to things to create balance in your brain, actual nervous system deceleration. Our conversation was fascinating. Now, I've worked out with her now. I've been at CrossFit Amesbury almost, it'll be 4 years in May. That's a long time. And I've known her all that time. And I never knew tons of what we talked about. So the Molly B Foundation has given lots and lots of money to help children in the performing arts. So shortly after Molly died, Derek and Kayla, good friends of Molly's, they danced together at CDA. Derek is mentioned in the book, went to a World Tap competition, and the Molly B Foundation t-shirt money helped send them there. Kayla is at Columbia now. She's had several auditions and created some dance videos, and she's absolutely dancing on a professional level. Derek is now rehearsing for his third Broadway show. He's been in Funny Girl, he's been in The Great Gatsby, and now he'll be in Boop, which opens in New York City in March. They both went with American Tap Company to the World Tap Championships. This past fall, the Molly B Foundation had the privilege of honoring a girl named Lucy and a girl named Scarlett, two other CDA dancers and thespians, people involved in theater, to go to the same championships, the World Tap Championships. My hope is that I'll be able to have an interview with Derek and Kayla that talk about the 7 years ago that they went and what that experience has done for them now. And then to talk to Lucy and Scarlett, who just came back and had this amazing experience and what they got from it and what they hope to do with it. Those connections to me are absolutely Molly connections, and my connections to all of those families, they're pretty profound connections. I also think it's fun to really get young people on the podcast. I know that as a 61, almost 62-year-old, maybe I appeal to an older crowd, but I do know that a lot of my listeners are Gracie and Molly's age, young people in their 20s. And so I think this will be fun to really hear it from the mouths of the people who are still doing it. And then my other plan is to have my Boston University track and field and cross country teammates. That's a huge group of people. I couldn't do that in one episode. It would be impossible. It's too many people to have at once. So I got to thinking about our connection and how we've been friends since the fall of 1981, which was the first year that the NCAA funded women's athletics. There's a lot of political back and forth around female athletics and what constitutes female and what's fair and what isn't fair. And as somebody that's always seen the physicality of sport, I've often just taken the opinion that sports is body-based and sex-based over gender identity-based, and that when we take away the differences in male bodies versus female bodies, as non-binary as gender is, and as sex can be, if you look at disorders of sexual development, there is a lot of wiggle room around between male and female. But when you look at an absolute male body and an absolute female body, they're very different. So my interview with my BU teammates will not be an argument over who should compete where, although that's where everyone's mind goes immediately. And that made me really sad. My whole goal for inviting all of these women to talk is to talk about what it was like to grow up without sports opportunities for girls. Let me be clear, human bodies with vaginas, that version of girl. When we were all growing up, there wasn't Little League for girls. There wasn't huge softball leagues and soccer and lacrosse and anything. Little girls went to tap and ballet. Little boys had Little League. They had baseball, they had hockey, they had football, all manner of sports, and we didn't. And then as it started to improve, as sporting opportunities opened up more for women, the inequities were apparent. And one of the biggest was collegiately. The NCAA, the National Collegiate Athletic Association, was in charge of sports. And for up until the end of the 60s, beginning of the 70s, that was men's sports only. There weren't women's sports. When those started to happen, there were club sports. And then it was called the AIAW, the Association of Interscholastic Athletics for Women. And the AIAW was not funded like the NCAA. The opportunities for female athletes were much smaller. Also, universities were not invested in scholarships because they were spending their money on the men's programs, which logically often brought in money. You have to pay to go to a football game. My freshman year of college was the first year that the NCAA recognized women. So I received a full scholarship in the fall of 1981 to Boston University. I was a member of the first class of female-bodied humans that were awarded athletic scholarships. That was huge. So there were 7 of us, this freshman class, and the athletes that were already there used to call us the herd. And we were sort of as crazy as you might think we were. But throughout the years, and with the advent of social media and being able to stay connected, we've had some tremendous reunions and get-togethers. It's been fantastic. So I suggested a series of podcast episodes, and talk about what it was like for us to be the first class of women, and how has that experience molded our lives and affected what we've done as adults and all of that. And not surprisingly, but heartbreakingly, the conversation's gone around and around now about how careful we have to be not to offend anybody. And I just feel like It's a reunion of the first class of women that were awarded full scholarships under the NCAA and had national titles that they could win and more equitable opportunities in sports as the men did. I think it's going to be wonderful. I will tell you right now, what you're going to hear is a lot of stories, a lot of individual accomplishments. I know for me, running has played a major piece in what I've done as an adult and how I've managed a lot of my ups and downs. I'm excited about it. And our coach, Joan Benoit Samuelson, was the first gold medalist in the women's marathon. The Olympics didn't even have a marathon for women until 1984. You had to be a man if you wanted to run the marathon in the Olympics. When she won that gold medal, that was just validation for all of us that we belonged, that there was a place for us in sports. So we have a really unique story. Some of the women that will be on the podcast came to BU a bit later, but still in that realm, they were also among the first class of athletes to be recognized by the NCAA. I know at that time, Boston University also funded women's basketball, and I believe field hockey, but I'm not 100% sure. I know that universities could do it sort of in waves. And here's the key, which is why I think there's still a lot of animosity between men and women when it comes to sports. Title IX set mandates. So the basic gist was you had to have equal opportunities for boys and girls, educationally, professionally, athletically. So for example, at BU, there was never going to be women's football. So what women's program would exist that didn't have a men's component so that the opportunities were equal? Because there's no female-bodied human that could withstand a Division I football program. So I know at BU, they ended up getting rid of the football program. Well, logically, that was met with anger and unhappiness by people dedicated to the football program at BU. How is that fair? We had to get rid of our program so a bunch of girls can have theirs. It was created in a way that was not unifying. It was very divisive. And I think that lends itself to the divisive nature of conversations around sports now. And I hope you all listen for when it's going to be on and listen to those episodes, because the women involved are amazing. My goal with this next season is to talk about all of the things that these women have gone through, both as they relate to them and to life in general, and as they relate to my story. I will also have a handful of mothers who have lost children. My purpose with those guests will be to share how alike we are, even though our stories are completely different. I have a mother who lost a child to ALS at a young age. I have a mother who lost a child to a drug overdose. I have a mother who lost a child to suicide. I have a mother who, like me, lost a child to a medical mistake. I have all manner of moms and all different ages of children. And as different as our stories are, how we feel and what we go through and the weight we carry is unbelievably similar. And giving these women a voice, giving these women a chance to talk about what it's like to be the mom of a dead kid will not only be helpful for them, but also helpful for me and what I'll take from it, and helpful for everyone who listens, whether you've lost a child or not. I imagine that will take us through March and April and probably May and into the summer. And I'm not sure what will happen after that. Hopefully more big things. I would love for the podcast to take off. Of course, that wouldn't require me to actually market the podcast and do more than just talk into my computer and send my messy, disorganized episodes off to my fabulous editor to create what you hear. I do that little bit of it, and that's sort of where it ends for me. The other piece of the season of guests is that I stagnate. I start to feel like I'm treading water, that, oh, here it is February again. It's a year later, and how am I different? I do that. I compare myself all the time, and I never, ever like the comparisons. So I could stop comparing, right? Then I wouldn't be sad, except I would compare inside my head. And so I become anxious that I'm not progressing, that I'm not making progress, that I'm not doing what I should be doing. I don't know. I don't know what I'm supposed to be doing. It's just difficult. So season 11 will be the season of guests. So by the time you hear this episode, it's mid-March. So the Molly B Foundation extravaganza is next week or 2 weeks from now as you hear this. So that's exciting. Hopefully by the time you hear this, a couple hundred tickets will have been sold. That will be super helpful. After that, it's April and it's Molly's birthday, and we start to get into that troubling time of year. I'll be doing an amazing CrossFit fundraising event for the Molly B Foundation, which will be all over my socials. So by the time you hear this, maybe I will have already put that on. It'll be an in-gym sort of competition that people can take part in. Not competition so much, an in-gym celebration of Molly and all she represented. But I'm looking to make that a really independently, hopefully one day nationwide CrossFit event for CrossFit's gyms that especially promote family and children and possibilities for youth. That would be my goal there. As I wrap up this sort of meaningless episode, a list of people I'm going to talk to and why. I am looking out my windows at piles and piles of snow. We've had a lot of snow this year, which I actually like. If it's going to be winter, it might as well be snowy. And I like the fact that it stays light until like 5:30. And then even though there's 2 tons of snow outside, I'm hoping that my physical maladies 2025 started off terribly. I've been sick and injured and just not well. Can't seem to get out of my own way, athletically speaking. So I'm hoping that that corner has turned. I will have finished the CrossFit Open, hopefully going to the quarterfinals. We'll see. All of these things will have happened by the time you hear me talk. On to whatever comes next. So I'm going to reach out and ask if you have an idea of a guest or a topic that you would like me to talk about. Please reach out and let me know. You can leave a comment on my social media. You can email me, sign up for my email newsletter. It's just go to the website, 1,000 Tiny Steps. You can sign up there. I don't sell things in my emails. It's almost like a weekly blog, but it's a great way to communicate with me if you want to talk and have questions. And so I would love to hear from people. That's how I'll get better at this and keep the podcast going. And if you think of other podcasts that I might, would be good for me to listen to and learn from, shoot that information to me as well. But I mostly would like to know, what do you want to hear? What deep, dark secrets of mine do you want me to share or tell? What secrets of yours would you like to have on the podcast? And where would you like to see it go from here? In actuality, I had hoped it would be more successful number-wise than it is at this time. However, you can't win a race if you don't do the training. And I do a very small part of what would need to be done to really propel this podcast into the next level of visibility. So that's mine to work on, I guess. I'm hoping that it will be successful and increase listeners, because I'm not the only one with a lot to say. And if there's one thing I've learned, it's closing my mouth so someone else can open theirs. It's just as important as sharing what I have to say. So be good to yourself. Share your stories. Share them with me if you can't share them yourself. Let me tell the world. Be good to someone else. Listen to them. Offer their story up for sharing, or lend a supportive ear. And as always, have a good day, everybody.
Hey, thanks for listening and supporting the podcast. Feel free to leave a review and share my stories with your friends. Please reach out with your own stories, as I love connecting with my listeners. If you would like to get to know Molly, head over to mollybfoundation.org to see what she is all about. If you want to see what I'm up to next, you can find me on Instagram at barb_444, on Facebook as Barb Higgins, and at my website, 1000tinysteps.com. And while you're there, sign up for my newsletter, a weekly way to find out what's up in the life of Barb Higgins.